the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. Two giants of our world, with a long history of conflict and cooperation. But how did they become what they are today? What lies behind their constantly shifting alliances and rivalries? In this tale, we'll take you on a journey from the century of humiliation and the rather counterintuitive Sino-Soviet friendship to the complex web of their modern dynamics and dependencies. Our story begins in the year 1839 in the mighty Qing Empire, a land of wealth and culture that had flourished for centuries. But this glorious era was about to end, as foreign invaders came to exploit, plunder, and oppress the people. The Qing, once a shining star, was reduced to a helpless pawn in the great game played by these powerful outsiders. Facing unprecedented hardship, a deep wound formed that would scar their national psyche for generations to come. This dark period of history was marked by several incredibly bloody wars and conflicts, in which China attempted to defend its sovereignty. Among the seemingly endless list of conflicts in the land at this time, three stand out as particularly significant, as they reveal the bitter struggle that they had endured against one of their most formidable historical foes, the Russians. The first major phase of the Sino-Russian Wars was the Dall-e crisis, which lasted from 1871 to 1881. It was about the fate of a region in Xinjiang, a vast and fertile area Russia had occupied at the time. While China did try to reclaim it, it ultimately failed, having to cede the region to the imperial power in the Treaty of St. Petersburg. The second phase of this conflict was the Pamir dispute, which lasted from 1883 to 1895. It was about the exploration and exploitation of the, you guessed it, Pamir Mountains, a range that bordered China, Russia, and Afghanistan. With the Bear sending expeditions to the area after the Dall-e crisis, and China reluctantly agreeing to recognize Russia's rights there in the Second Forced Protocol of St. Petersburg. The third and arguably worst phase was during the Boxer Rebellion. While only lasting from 1899 to 1901, it was by far the bloodiest affair of the three. It was about the invasion of Manchuria, a region in northeastern China that was rich in resources and land. Russia sent troops to Manchuria to suppress the growing Boxers, a nationalist uprising against the foreign powers that had exploited their lands. However, in the end, China was forced to allow Russia to stay in Manchuria, as outlined in the signing of the Boxer Protocol. After the rebellion in the region, the Sino-Russian War carved a large chunk of Qing land at the time, and as a result, a lot of power in the region. They were forced to accept Russia's dominance in Manchuria and the western lands of Xinjiang. This century had a profound impact on China's national identity, political system, and foreign policy. It not only shattered its sense of self, but also triggered an uninterruptible process of radical transformation. The repeated ignominies by the foreign powers led to the collapse of the last imperial dynasty of China. Their fall opened the way for the emergence of the Republic of China, and later the People's Republic of China. The entire system underwent a drastic change. From an imperial monarchy, it evolved into a republic, and then into a socialist republic. This change reflected a dramatic shift in governance and a determined quest for autonomy. Rising from the ashes of its century of humiliation, China renewed a fierce determination to recover its long-lost prestige and stand up against the likes of Russia, Britain, Japan, and Germany. This indomitable resolve now propels their foreign policy, marking a steadfast journey to rectify past perceived wrongs and reclaim geopolitical supremacy by methodically reintegrating misplaced territories into the cold embrace of the modern Republic of China. Fast forward to 1945, in the ashes of the Chinese Civil War, a new axis was born, the Sino-Soviet alliance, an uneasy friendship baked together from the heat of the growing Cold War. The Communist Party of China discovered a stalwart companion in the Soviet Union. While the Soviets had been meticulously observing the astonishing series of events unfolding in China, and you can bet their curiosity was piqued, a new potential vassal, a new friend was just declaring its ideology on the global stage. As such, the victory of the Communist Party was not a surprise. Their triumph was met quickly with support from the Soviet Union, establishing a clear ideological bond that would stand the test of the tumultuous period that lay ahead. This readiness to lend a hand was particularly apparent during critical periods like the Korean War and the Taiwan Strait crisis, when the Soviets stood in unison with their communist comrades, offering unyielding military and logistical support against the capitalist West. This alliance was presented to the world not just merely as a superficial political agreement. It was shown with a desire to project strong partnerships and brotherhoods that fortified both nations' defense mechanisms, economic stability, and ideological beliefs. The Soviets extended their hand, bestowing China military support, economic aid, and political legitimacy on the world platform. In reciprocation, China offered the Soviets an important strategic ally in East Asia, a region that was spiraling into the vortex of Cold War tensions. Furthermore, this alliance facilitated an exchange of technology and know-how. The Soviets, in their magnanimity, shared their advancements in nuclear technology, space exploration, and industrial innovations with their counterparts. This exchange of knowledge played a pivotal role in catapulting China into the realm of rapid industrialization and technological progression in the subsequent decades. Now, the most crucial aspect of this alliance was the shared vision of the world, a common ideology. Both China and Russia, as communist powers, stood as an unwavering front. This ideological camaraderie was a decisive factor in the strength and longevity of the Sino-Soviet alliance, allowing it to withstand numerous political squalls. Incorporating a strong sense of unity, the alliance had an impact that reverberated beyond borders. We will soon see, though, that this was all just one fragile illusion, a facade just waiting to be broken. The complex relationship between these two giant nations experienced a dramatic transformation in the mid-20th century. What started as a close, no-limits alliance based on the common cause of communism soon turned into a bitter rivalry fueled by hair-splitting ideological differences and geopolitical interests. The Sino-Soviet split, as this phenomenon is known, had far-reaching implications for the global and regional order and reshaped the course of history as we know it. Now, the seeds of this split were sown with the death of Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, in 1953. His successor, Nikita Khrushchev, embarked on a campaign of what's known as de-Stalinization, which aimed to reform and liberalize the Soviet system. He denounced Stalin's crimes and atrocities against humanity and introduced policies to improve the living standards and human rights of the people. Or, at least, that was his intention. Regardless, these changes were welcomed by many in the world, but not by Mao, who, as we know, was a staunch admirer and follower of Stalin. Mao viewed Khrushchev as a revisionist and a traitor who had abandoned the true path of the revolution. He criticized Khrushchev's reforms as a deviation from the principles of Marxism-Leninism and took this as a sign of weakness and cowardice. The ideological rift between the two intensified with their divergent attitudes toward the West. Khrushchev sought to ease the tensions with the Western powers, especially the United States, and promote peaceful coexistence. He believed that the Cold War could be avoided and that the communist and capitalist systems could coexist without war. Of course, Mao opposed this approach and advocated for a more confrontational and militant stance. He believed that the West was the main enemy of the communist cause and that the revolution had to be spread by force. He accused Khrushchev of capitulating to the imperialists and betraying the interests of the so-called Third World, where they competed for influence in their own version of a Cold War. These ideological discordances had serious consequences for the bilateral relations and the global order. The Soviet Union withdrew its advisors and aid from China, leaving it isolated and causing it to halt further development. Most worryingly, the two countries directly clashed over their border disputes, notably at Zhenbao Island, where they fought a bloody war in 1969. The two countries also supported different factions in the wars in Vietnam and Cambodia, creating more instability and violence in the already ravaged region. The ideological divergence led to a major shift in global alliances. China, feeling threatened by the Soviet Union, sought to paradoxically improve its relations with the United States, its former enemy. This was a counterintuitive move, as China had greatly opposed the Soviet Union's attempt to reconcile with the West and had denounced the United States as the imperialist aggressor. However, the CCP saw this as a strategic move to balance the power of the Soviet Union. This resulted in the historic visit of President Richard Nixon to China in 1972, which marked the beginning of the normalization of ties between the two countries. Looking back, the ideological rift between China and Russia was more than just a conflict between two nations. It served as a glaring reminder of the profound impact such seemingly minute rifts can have, not just on the nations, but on the entire global order. As the 20th century drew to a close, the two old rivals, with a rich and intricate history, found a new common ground. The end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union reshaped the global political landscape once again, creating new opportunities and challenges for both countries. China and Russia, seemingly decided to put aside their past grievances and forge a new partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and common values. An important step in this process was the apparent resolution of long-standing border disputes. These had been a major source of tension and conflict between the two countries, as they involved not only territory friction, but also pride and identity. In the early years of the 21st century, the duo signed a series of agreements that settled their border issues and demarcated their boundaries, although we will see later that this is not as complete of an agreement as they'd like to project. Regardless, for now, this resolution not only improved their bilateral relations, but also laid the foundation for a new era of Eastern cooperation. Economically, they became vital trading partners, with China importing Russian military hardware, oil and gas, and Russia benefiting from China's growing market and investment capital. Politically, in 2001, they signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. And no, I did not just make that name up. This was said to reaffirm their commitment to peace, sovereignty, and non-interference, or whatever. They also collaborated within various international organizations, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS Group, where they championed their shared interests and perspectives on the global stage, mostly at the behest of the other members. They supported each other in the United Nations, where they often formed a united front with veto power, providing a counterbalance against Western initiatives. Despite some petty, hair-splitting policy differences, because we all know those have never stopped them before, right? They continued to synchronize their diplomatic and economic moves, striving to construct their view of a multipolar New World Order. Both countries exhibiting a shared disdain for dissent and an aspiration for tighter control of their societies. And with these shared values, along with their reciprocal economic and political interests, they yet again created an illusion of harmony, a no-limits friendship, as they like to call it. But what truly brought the two together again was not a genuine camaraderie based on mutual respect and trust. It was a pragmatic alliance based on a shared sense of desperation, isolation, and a conveniently similar vision for the future world order. They saw in each other not a partner, but a weapon, a means to counter their common enemy. As the 21st century progressed, China and Russia entered a new phase of their relations under the leadership of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. This chapter was characterized by the rise of the People's Republic of China as a clear global power, and the emergence of the new Russian Federation, which also aspired itself to be a global titan, but as we have seen time and time again, was a regional power with long arms, at best. One of the most significant manifestations of this cooperation was their joint efforts in the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious land and sea project, ultimately led by China. It aimed to construct a network of trade and infrastructure linking Asia with Europe and Africa along the ancient Silk Roads, though, as always, at the cost of countless of billions of yuan from the pocketbooks of the developing countries it traverses. Russia, with its ever-expansive landscape and strategic geographical positioning, played an instrumental role in this initiative, while China provided the thrust, direction, and of course, the loans to construct. Now their cooperation was not confined solely to economic initiatives. It's extended far beyond into areas such as healthcare, security, and technology. During the You-Know-What-19 pandemic, the two presented another united front, sharing resources and expertise, and even jointly developing a vaccine. However, history shows clearly how well, or not so well, that went. This isolated collaboration in the face of an otherwise united global response to the health crisis served to further strengthen their partnership and steadfast commitment to mutual support. In the realm of military and security, the Sino-Russian ties deepened considerably. Russia has once again emerged as a major supplier of military technology to the Asian giant, and the two nations conduct joint exercises regularly, enhancing interoperability and demonstrating their combined strength. This burgeoning military cooperation sent a clear message to the world. They stood together, or so they say. The path of the Sino-Russian partnership has not been devoid of challenges, far from it. Much like the prior bouts of cooperation, differences in economic structures, geopolitical interests, and domestic ideological issues posed potential obstacles to this no-limits friendship. And over time, we have seen Russia's growing dependence on China due to the ever-increasing international sanctions on the bear, imposed as a result of their never-ending post-imperial ambitions on their many neighbors. Moreover, while they share a vision of establishing a multipolar international system, Their perspectives on what that system should look like once implemented have yet to be seen. Looking ahead, we can see that the Sino-Russian relations are full of uncertainty, ideological greed, and repeating cycles of abrupt conflict and deep peace. Besides the external factors, internal politics within both countries play a crucial role. Their unique political systems, a potent blend of authoritarian control and state-guided capitalism, presents its own set of challenges. Let's explore some potential scenarios and confrontations that could arise from present-day events. One of the sources of potential confrontation between China and Russia is the Chinese map controversy, which involves the depiction of some disputed territories as part of China's historical claims. The new map, released by China's Ministry of Natural Resources on Monday, August 28, 2023, shows the so-called 9-dash line, claiming almost the entire South China Sea, as well as a 10th dash to the east of Taiwan. The map also includes Bolshoi Ussuriski Island, a plot of dirt at the confluence of the Amur and Ussuri rivers, as Chinese territory, even though the countries signed an agreement nearly 20 years ago to split the island equally. This has sparked protests from several countries in the region, including Malaysia, the Philippines, India, and Taiwan. Russia, however, has remained uncharacteristically silent on the map issue, probably reflecting the priority it puts on the strategic dependencies with China, especially after the sanctions imposed on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. This event could undermine the trust and respect that the two countries have built over the years, and could trigger new border disputes and tensions, especially if China tries to enforce its claims militarily or diplomatically, while the Russian military is weakened globally. Who knows, maybe China will take its chances when the time is right and correct what they perceive as historical humiliations during that horrendous century, while also positioning itself as the saviors of Eurasia. It could also affect their cooperation and coordination on various regional and global issues, such as the security and stability of the Asia-Pacific, the development and integration of the Eurasian continent, and the reform and governance of the international system. Moreover, it could yet again create opportunities for the third parties, such as the United States, the European Union, India, and Japan, to exploit the rift between China and Russia, and to increase their influence and presence in the regions of strategic importance. For example, the United States could use the map as a pretext to strengthen its alliances and partnerships with the countries in the Indo-Pacific, and to counter China's Belt and Road Global Debt Initiative, or Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The European Union could also use the map as leverage to pressure China on its many human rights and trade issues, and to support the democratic aspirations of Taiwan and Hong Kong. While India, another historical enemy of China and BRICS member, could use this opportunity of distraction and turmoil to return lands they've been disputing with the CCP for decades in Aksai Chin Plateau and the state of Arunachal Pradesh, where they regularly fight unarmed skirmishes in the mountains. A possible future conflict between China and Russia could arise from a Russian collapse scenario, kinda like the bear has already twice seen in its history. This would pose the opportunity mentioned previous for China to look like a savior rather than invader. This could drastically improve China's relations on a global stage while furthering its own geopolitical goals. This scenario envisions that the weakened empire suffers a major political and economic crisis, such as a coup, a civil war, or a revolution, that erodes its central authority and its control over its vast territory, especially in the Far East and Siberia, where China has historical claims and many economic interests. They could easily cut the middleman out. For example, they could assert its rights over the Amur and Ussuri rivers, which were ceded to Russia by unequal treaties in the 19th century. This scenario could also be triggered by external factors, such as a Russian military conflict with NATO, or a natural disaster the weakened central authority cannot address, that disrupts Russia's security and infrastructure. For instance, a NATO airstrike could damage a nuclear power plant in Russia, causing a radiation leak and a humanitarian crisis, or another Wagner-like rebellion accesses Russia's vast armory of weapons of mass destruction. In this, China would send troops and humanitarian aid to the Russian Far East and Siberia, claiming to restore order and stability, while also securing its access to oil, gas, and minerals. They would also use its economic and diplomatic leverage, like the Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to influence and shape the outcome of the crisis, and to establish its dominance and hegemony in the region through their crushing tactics of imposing debt for infrastructure deals. Without even using its military, China could easily offer loans and investments to the breakaway regions of Russia, and persuade them to join their CCP-dominated economic blocs, while also isolating them from the West. Importantly, this is not a concocted hypothesis or a product of my whimsical imagination. This accurately represents the shifts and changes that have occurred in the post-Soviet Central Asian regions since the early 90s. Gradually but surely, China has been absorbing the region into its sphere of economic influence, while Russia's once esteemed reputation in the area has steadily declined. The Sino-Russian bond is a complex and dynamic one that has gone through many ups and downs in history. It's driven by both strategic interests and ideological affinities, but also constrained by deep, unanswered historical nationalist grievances and geopolitical rivalries. It'll continue to have profound implications for the future of our global order, as it poses a serious threat to the values and interests of the democratic free world. The two countries violently suppress dissent and human rights at home and abroad while seeking to challenge and reshape the existing rules and norms into a new world, a world shaped by their order and in their twisted images. One needs not to look much further than the Xinjiang region of China, where international condemnation for genocidal tendencies have been loud and clear, or in the many, many Russian regions who have attempted to create their own country, to decide their own destinies and fates, but were brutally suppressed and reintegrated into the Russian Federation. Hardly a world we would aspire to inhabit, where authoritarian force, like seen in the South China Sea, dictates diplomacy, and the common folk perpetually live under the oppressive boots of tyranny.